Now, I don't know if you're like me, but do you have an Apple phone with the podcast app on it? Now, the podcast app is probably one of my most opened applications on my phone because I find them so valuable. If I just click into it now, I can tell you, I'd give you a few of my most listened to podcasts and see if you are listened to or you've heard any of them. So I've got the unofficial Shopify podcast. Shopify is an e-commerce platform that I use for my business. I've got E-commerce Fuel, which is a podcast all about e-commerce and selling on the internet, different platforms, using social media, things like that. And then I've got Shopify Masters again, Shopify platform, and this Disruptive Entrepreneur, which is a Rob Moore podcast. Again, just like a mentor, I think you can grab so much value out of podcasts. And again, there are podcasts that will do all kinds of areas of life. There's religious podcasts, there's business podcasts, there's health podcasts, book podcasts, author podcasts, literally everything. And I even have very good friends that have their own podcasts, and it's really a way of getting over information. So I think podcasts work for one of two reasons. One, if you're an avid podcast listener like myself, it's a great way to almost let the masters speak in your ear. Now, there's a guy in the e-commerce world, his name is Ezra Firestone. He owns a couple of makeup brands. He also owns Zipify Pages, which is a Shopify plugin. Now, he is pretty much the king of e-commerce, and he is on as a guest one of the podcasts all the time. It's fascinating to hear his insight into what's happening within his e-commerce businesses and the platforms or the SaaS platforms that he owns. Now, that's something that I would never be able to do unless I wanted to pay a lot of money to be in his kind of golden circle. But podcasts give me the opportunity to listen and learn from the masters. The other side is, if you have value and you have knowledge that you want to impart with people, then podcasting is a great way to be non-intrusive, but actually give that value. And they can be in the gym or walking home or whatever and listening to you talk about your selective field. Podcasts are great because you don't have to be looking at anything while you're learning and while you're listening. So for me, while I'm cooking, so we get a HelloFresh delivery every week. That's useless information, I'll tell you. HelloFresh, you have to chop up stuff all the time. So I find it really helpful whacking the podcast, chopping away, preparing the meal, and it's a good time to kind of fit two things in at once. And I'm learning while I'm cooking, which is pretty cool. At the gym as well, if I'm on the treadmill, I find the treadmill is really difficult to maintain a kind of focus. But if I'm listening to a podcast or an audiobook, I can zone straight out of what I'm actually doing and kind of go onto autonomous motion of just the running while listening and learning. And there's loads of practical applications when you can be listening in the car on long journeys, etc. like that. So if you have listened to podcasts, drop in below which podcast you listen to and why. And if you haven't, then definitely go and check out a podcast that you find relevant to the business that you're in.